It is my distinct honor to introduce our esteemed speaker, Professor James Hutson, who holds the prestigious position of Lead XR Disruptor and Department Head of Art History and Visual Culture at Lindenwood University. His remarkable contributions to the field are numerous and noteworthy. Our speaker is the visionary founder of the Immersive Arts and Culture Hub and the XR and Gaming Lab. These initiatives have been pivotal in fostering immersive experience for all students, thereby enhancing equitable education. In addition to these accomplishments, he spearheads the AI Initiative and AI Ambassador programs at the university. These efforts focus on integrating AI across various majors, preparing students for the technological disruptions in education and everyday life. Dr. Hutson leads an international research team that pioneers collaborative authorship models to tackle complex problems. His leadership extends to his role as the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Emerging and Disruptive Innovation in Education, that is IJEDIE, where he enriches interdisciplinary discourse. His extensive experience includes teaching over 120 online courses, developing award-winning online degree programs, and authoring over 1,000 academic works. His dedication to education and innovation is truly inspiring. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to our distinguished speaker, Dr. Hutson.
Thank you so much. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, Doctor.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you so much. Humbled to be invited today to share with such amazing scholars. Just watching the last few. I come from, as noted, the cultural side. And I then began my foray into technology. So we're going to be looking at it from the importance of maintaining and producing and capturing cultural heritage for the next generation by way of the use of technology. And as the title of the talk suggests, we're looking at balancing something that is entirely fictitious or made up, like Disney World or Disneyland, like a simulacrum, versus what is actually faithful to the historical data that we have as best of our knowledge. And so I will be proposing the creation of a new subfield or genre in the digital humanities for the period materialities for the period I, which is going to state that you can use and leverage new generative artificial intelligence technologies in order to maintain historical fidelity, which previously was only possible for a few scholars, very specialized scholars in given areas. So we'll be talking about this notion of how do we see things from the perspective of those that created it, from the intention that they had, as well as ensuring fidelity for that given culture. And of course, being very careful by way of ethical considerations of not usurping or monetizing, right, another culture for Eurocentric purposes in this way for Western audiences. So in that process, we have been working with a number of various entities. We started with doing digital twins of churches, of understudied churches, and cultural heritage sites in Florence, Italy. Then we moved on to working with the University of Mosul, which had in 2017, 2014 to 2017, much of their cultural heritage destroyed by ISIS. And so we're working with them in order to reconstitute the artifacts that were lost, damaged, and or impossible to recreate without the technologies that we have now. Now, as far as digital cultural heritage, this goes back about 2 decades. We didn't really have the technology and the expertise on either side of this kind of digital divide until around 2000. And so we are able now, given the expansion and the usability and the lower the barrier to entry that we have for these technologies, to bridge the gap between historians, anthropologists, those that are studying the cultures and know them quite well, archaeologists, and those that have the technical skills in order to help preserve them and recreate them. Now, this book goes all the way back, arguably, to the foundations of the Hellenic world, right? They started in 1999, building these kind of 3D models, trying to recreate what the Hellenistic world would have looked like, right? Some from Miletus to these other cosmopolitan cities, right, along the coast of Asia Minor, based on the descriptions, the sketches, the engravings, and in collaboration with the historians of what they would look like. Now, something along the lines of a theater is pretty easy to recreate because we still have all of the seats, or most of them, in their original set as they would have been seen. But then others, such as palaces and things that are now just going to be a few columns and a substructure, we need additional help. Now, of course, the way in which these would have been viewed would be using cave technology, and so an early kind of form of virtual reality in which you can reconstitute and see these lost cities, right? These Roman colonies on the coast of Asia Minor, as noted, but in very, from our sense, very rudimentary early versions of 3D technology and animation. This then is going to expand in other great examples that we see around the world with museums that are either interactive or entirely virtual, such as Electronica in Austria, as well as these VR museums that become popular, which are entirely seen only in virtual reality, right? So they don't try to constitute anything in the real world. So it is a true simulacrum, right? So it's going to be something that is entirely made up, that does not exist where we are, but gives you a sense of moving through this type of architectural space that would not be possible otherwise. Combining that with earlier versions, which we really didn't see really being explored until around 2008, 2010, of photogrammetric scanning, in which you would have to take thousands, if not tens of thousands of photographs, and then manually stitch them together in order to create a virtual or digital twin of a given existing object. Now, this works really well and is known in industry because it allows you to make digital twins of aeronautical parts, engines, various types of machinery, and then train people on it without the needed expense of having to ship it and or recreate it in different areas. They can be trained in this virtual setting. But again, all of these exist in the real world. We're not recreating anything. We're merely capturing. Now you can do it with your basic iPhone or iPad using the LiDAR that's built in, which is really just radiating series of lasers and recreating kind of a three-dimensional space, regardless and irrespective of the type of visual spectrum of light that we have. But these are handheld now. Everyone has the ability to do this. And so we're seeing this rapid advance in technology over the past 2 decades. And this is what we need to preserve cultural heritage around the world. We're working with another project with Preserving Records Everywhere in the country of Burundi, in which they're digitizing 1 million of their records that they don't have access to and people cannot access in the country. And so the notion is using these technologies, we give the history and the culture and one's sense of self back to different cultures that had them destroyed. And so this is really important for moving forward. We need to be able to do this relatively cheaply, inexpensively, quickly, with very little training and expertise. And so that team is working with basic flip phone cameras, right? So in order to take various images, and then we're adding chronotags and geotags to them. And so we need that type of on the ground intervention so that we can actually capture what is going to be lost due to geopolitical climates, wars, climate change, etc. But through generative artificial intelligence, we're able to do new things now, which is to recreate lost or damaged works based upon other exempla. So if we have a particular work that was damaged, such as the giant Buddha statues, right, on the Silk Road that were destroyed by the Taliban, if we have photographs of those that exist before and existing examples that we can scan now, we can take that and aggregate the data together in order to recreate a fairly historically accurate facsimile of what that object looked like. And that's what we're able to do now with art restoration and reconstruction. We're at the very early stages Most art historians are very weary of anything digital. So you don't have a widespread adoption of the digital humanities or digital art history. So we are the minority at this point in trying to show how these technologies can work in order to benefit cultures in general around the world. But here are some examples in which you're using this kind of 3D modeling software. I'll give you an example of what we're doing here with two projects, the 1785 Parisian Salon, but the Rosetta Initiative by Purdue is one of them, in which they're going to be looking at just the base structure, the rubble of these ancient urban settlements, and trying to recreate them based upon the aggregated data that they have, which may include dozens of etchings, engravings, drawings, descriptions, right, that you can bring together and get fairly close. And the same thing, the Venice Time Machine project also has them reconstructing digital records. But what you're able to do with this is fairly phenomenal. There are challenges. It does address the challenges in historical reconstruction, conservation, and restoration, in that we have quite a bit of material culture throughout history that has been destroyed. If you look at most art, quote unquote, that survives from antiquity, it's largely going to be architecture or the remnants of architecture, very large, durable substances, granite, stone, right? Things that wear down over time but still exist. The ephemera of painting and other types of sculpture hasn't made it. So what do we do that those are lost to time? Well, if we have various exemplars, then we can create an aggregate, and then now through various types of substance editors, right, give a good example of what the patina of something may have looked like, etc. But we're shifting towards more and more accurate and reliable and reproducible approaches to artificial intelligence and being leveraged for historical recreation. The particular example we'll be giving today for high-resolution scans will be using Quixel Megascans and the Unreal Engine in this way, but this can be done in many different examples. So per the projects, which I'll share the links at the end of this, so you can see exactly what steps were taken for this. We worked to recreate the Parisian Salon of 1785, which is pre-revolution France, right before the revolution, as a matter of fact, and the one where David's Oath of the Horatii, a very famous 18th century painting, was first exhibited. There's, of course, going to be a second version that exists in North America. Now, this massive painting was just one of hundreds that were in the salon, as you can see here in the engraving, right? So moving all the way around the four walls of the Salon Carré. Now, many of these works no longer are known or do not exist or are lost. So the first step in this was, of course, trying to map out the physical space. So how did we approach it? The methodology that we took was based upon another archaeoacoustics kind of approach, which, if you're unfamiliar with this, looking at sound archaeology, that being, if we can no longer hear what something sounded like in the Neolithic era, what do we do, right? So you go into the space and you attempt to recreate it, verify it, record it in this way. So in the same way, if we no longer have works of art, how do we recreate them? You collect existing comprehensive, as much as possible, data sets in order to, from the period, from the same time period, and ideally from the same artist. If you have 30 other examples, then you can recreate from that type of engraving what the style, the color palette, the brushwork, all of that would have looked like. So as long as you train it on good data, that being, there's no substitute for, as has been mentioned several times so far in the conference, there's no substitute for good, clean data, right? So well organized, making sure that it's actually usable, right? So once you have that, you can do amazing things. So we started in order to determine what the space would have looked like through a period eye by looking at the plans for the Louvre, which was the royal residence prior to Louis XIV building Versailles. But then, of course, it turned into a a public museum and viewing place until Napoleon takes it over and makes it his Napoleonic Museum. So it went through several stages of a redesign. So we found the plans, we looked at and were presenting at Versailles and worked with curators at the Louvre who were very familiar with the history of the building, and went in, did many high-resolution scans and took photographs, as you see here on the right, compared it to several paintings and renditions, engravings, prints of what contemporaries showed the interior space to look like. And then we had to start kind of reconstructing it, because there are doors where there weren't, there were windows, there was a stairwell. And so figuring out where the walls would go. So here you have the early attempts by our 3D modeler and game designer starting off to try to see what that would look like in Unreal Engine. Of course, trying to figure out the three-dimensional space and building that out architecturally for the various partitions on the sides of the windows. What would that look like three-dimensionally? And then if you look in the engravings, you'll notice that the paintings are covering up where the windows would be and where these recesses are. So here's the modern room on the top right here, but trying to determine where and how tall. These would have been very tall windows. You'll notice they terminate now, just around 15 feet high, not that large. So in order to determine, once we got the shape of the room down, we had to then go into the process of, through research, using both the knowledge of art historians, curators, archivists, and then, of course, those on the technical side, in trying to determine what would the materials look like on the interior. So, of course, we looked at scans for the marble. We used Quixel megascans for the base textures here, looked at reclaimed types of wood for the templates. Right, and then looked at different paintings, such as the one you see here of the Gallery of the Louvre. What type of Venetian damask was on the walls, what type of flooring. It does not have the same parquet flooring that it does today at this time, what type of drapery would have been used. And then looking for ways to recreate that with the various type of assets that you have to skin things with within these engines, and or recreating your own. So as you can see that here with the Venetian damask pattern. Same thing for the flooring, for the reclaimed wood, trying to see what it would have looked like, and then trying to get the same texture in that way that would have been agreed upon by other experts. So as you can see here, the types of research done by our team, Dr. Trenton Olson, as well as Professor Charles O'Brien, looked at trying to match the type of marbling that you would have had for the Erebuscato here, as well as the reclaimed wood texture. And then moved on to, okay, we have the interior space. We know what the textures will look like. Now let's go to recreate these lost paintings and see if we can make that work. So we took two paintings, one that we knew about, which is going to be from Telesson on the east wall that you can see in the engraving, and another one by Vestier that we don't know where it was located, but it's listed among the inventory that was shown. So we used, starting off, normal maps, we'll show you this, crafted for both paintings, one known, one unknown, and then looked at other works by the unknown artist Vestier in order to recreate that. We used, once again, these bump maps that were going to be processed through this normal map generator I'll show you. This is all in Unreal Engine, by the way, and then use the specific settings, right, for the strength, the level, the blur, etc., in order to look at the different types of displacement parameters. So here is, the earlier one. Once again, it doesn't exist. We have engravings of it and other images by the artist. So we had to put together what the original would look like. Then, of course, you move on to the bump map and then the normal map that's created on that off to the far right. And then moving on to the one that is unknown, right? So here's the AI reproduction of the unknown work based upon the aggregate for the data set that we put together for this artist, right? You have the bump map in the center as well, and then moving on to the normal map. Again, this is all going to be Unreal Engine 5 using Quixel megascans. Right, and so with this, we can showcase how the type of process and the steps can be taken and replicated for those works that no longer exist, but we have exemplars of, descriptions of, or engravings of, so that we can then extrapolate from that based upon the period style, the methodologies, the techniques that were used, etc., in order to recapture that so it's not lost to history. So the conclusions of the project indicate that there is the ability to produce this type of replicable process whereby you can use widely available and free technologies, by the way, from things that people have on their phones to the game engines. I know one changed their pricing plan recently, but there still are plenty of free options to, once again, these immersive spaces like spatial, etc., where you can drop this into and move it around. So the barrier for the technical skills required has been lowered a great deal, allowing those with the historical expertise and those from other fields to collaborate together in order to reconstitute this type of period materiality for the period I. These are the two studies. We're happy to share them so you can see step by step. One is for the interior space and what went into that. The other one is in regards to the images that were going to be recreated. Another one that we did was going to be Calais' Achilles dragging Hector's body past the walls of Troy. That's another one that we recreated from an engraving. But happy to answer any questions. Feel free to email me and or call me, and I look forward to the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Dr. Hutson. That's a great presentation. And I was impressed with the paintings you have shown.
Oh, was that a question? Oh, I'm sorry, here, I'll put my email in the chat. So feel free to email me with additional questions, and then I will turn it over to the next presenter.